Most people in America are looking forward to winter. I myself has always enjoyed the holidays since a childhood. In our family, Christmas time was really kind of marvelous. There was always the harpsichord playing. There was always a what do you call it? The music box Christmas in the background, and a CD that no one can ever find. We find things close, but not the same. As a child, we didn't have lots of money for fancy wrapping paper, and at the time, I don't think there was much. My mom always did an amazing job at the time when we didn't know there was no, not to hurt anybody's feelings, situational clause, but openly what we learned was my mother would always wrap the gifts the same way so we would feel the clause of Christmas. Since there might be children listening, I've got to be careful what I say, but what I can tell you is that she would always give me white tissue paper to draw on, to put my art on, as my way to specially mark packages from me to my siblings and my mother and father. I also remember that we were able to buy gifts in our little elementary school gift shop for our family members. I also know that Mom dragged me shopping, and by the time that I was probably in mid-elementary school, I was babysitting and cat sitting and pet sitting and mail picking up for people on holidays, and I was starting to put my own little money away for Christmas over the course of the year. I've always been someone who has been driven in business. I started my first business entity in photography at age 15, and I actually was able to bring in some of the prettiest girls, and one I really loved, into my home studio in my basement, which wasn't marvelous, wasn't cool, but it was certainly something that most kids didn't have at their home. And I took some amazing photographs, considering I had very little money in my equipment back then. As I progressed to wedding photography, I did my best to deal with all the difficulties of the socially inappropriate guests that would fire my studio lamps that I had to work pretty hard to afford back then. I should still have a couple of them in storage. I realized that I didn't need 3 of them. That was way too much power for what I was doing, and I went to 2 with reflectors and strobo frames and other types of light forms of a similar name and similar brand and similar company called Bogan, but is now Manfrotto today, unless it's changed hands again. The reality of American photography is that it has completely been impacted by cellular technology, that our cell phones are now taking photographs almost as good as a high-quality camera or SLR, but thankfully they still sell them, and a beautiful medium format digital camera such as a Mamiya or Hasselblad is something that is always on the horizon, and the desire of a latent type of photographer to get the square format. But most people did not want to monkey with individual sheet film back then, and a lot of people did not have large format cameras. Only mega studio houses might have, because they knew that their guests were paying quite a lot for their photography. I didn't do that. I just did it to put myself through college. Humbly speaking, I was an okay photographer. I did my best with the equipment that I had, beginning with the Pentax and then moving into Nikon, and openly I always stayed with that. I moved out of SLR manual into more automated things by the time the N90 came around, and I probably still have one someplace with a lot of very expensive fast glass. I always valued Nikon for the fact that they did not change their bayonet mount, ruining the right to use old glass, and I'm grateful and thankful for that. Other companies like Canon and Pentax did do that, and it really pissed a lot of company people off that wanted to keep their historic lenses instead of going totally autofocus. But in truth, I moved to EDI f-at glass, which was quite expensive, and I have quite a lot of lenses that were right for me in terms of photography, for both architectural work and photographic work, portraiture of people, which is usually in 35mm ways, and 85 or 105. When it comes to digital, the whole scope and mathematics of that changes and shifts, and the numbers are quite different. But when you study lighting, and when you had the marvelous books that I used to buy from HP Photo Books all the time as a child at $20 plus a pop, I learned quite a lot through those series and read often and reread them a lot. I also got the ASMP book to talk about the legalities of being a photographer, but sadly today people do not understand copyright in any way, and that is really a tragedy. because a lot of people are selecting images that don't belong to them and using them for business, and that's not okay. In my work and in my world, I would often purchase the artwork and change it in some way in order to make it more mine, but I had to pay for licensing of those pieces that I didn't design. And openly, most people who know me understood that I did that because I did not have that graphic design capability, because the last year of my college is when that program launched. Literally, they started a graphic design program as I was leaving my senior year in university. So everything else I've learned since then has been self-taught. I love Photoshop, I love Illustrator, and I absolutely adore InDesign. It's a marvelous book in which to write books and other types of manuals of every kind. What I also love in those programs is the ability to turn things into images so that they work across the imagery of a computer system and an internet system that doesn't always keep unique fonts as it should, because the person on the other end might not have them. I'm most definitely a font man. You see, every word and every name, every title, every company name looks a certain way in fonting today. And openly, you have to have that visual communication capability, like me, of knowing how to put words and pictures together. But at the same time, you can see a scene in a film based on the number of movies I have watched by some of the best directors in the world, across different languages even sometimes. And even in Japan, we had a marvelous time on television watching and enjoying a lot of things, especially around New Year's. And I definitely miss those game shows that we'd watch all day and in our kotatsu, which kept us warm in every way. But in America, they don't sell too many of those kotatsus, and someday I'd like to have one of those in my home again, provided it's safe and provided it won't cause a fire of any kind. Because a kotatsu is a heated table in which you put a quilt within the top of the table and the bottom legs. And that is something that my child and my wife would fall asleep in, because a Japanese house does not have central heating. And you're lucky if it has air conditioning. So in America, we are very spoiled about not only the cost of our food, because the cost of three, way back 20 years ago, for 3 people in my family to eat was about $600. But at home, when we came back to America, it was probably closer to $150. You see, America is privileged in many ways, but we have to remember that every single day, because American life and livelihood and legacy is so important today.